let's get to this big story around the African Union Commission, which has gathered hundreds of high-level delegates from across Africa to discuss the role of the private sector towards achieving the goals and objectives of the new Intra-Africa Trade Agreement, or the AfCFTA. Now let's take excerpts from the flag-off of the two-day forum, which kicked off today in Nairobi.
And majority are youth population. Gave an example of women in Kenya, and in subsectors, they are leading, especially in garment industries. He also talked about the importance of digital economy through reducing costs. He gave an example of intra-African trade, which is low compared to other continents like in Asia, which is far higher. Lastly, he gave an example of the importance of industrialization in Africa and ensure their support in that regard. Ms. Susan also from KEPSA talked about the sustained food stocks, importance of that, and how to ease cross-border movement. She talked about collaboration in key between public-private partnership sectors, civil societies, academia, innovators, which is also important to drive the Agenda 2063. She talked about the 3/4 of trade in Africa, which is driven by private sector, and private sector also contribute to 75% of the GDP. That was an example of Kenya. And she raised also an important issue in the advancement of technology and the need to focus on micro and small enterprises, as well as the need to collaborate and form united front in order to mitigate these challenges. Lastly, she talked about building public support and stressed the importance of innovation and governance.
Our strategy as Africa Business Council is based on 3 pillars, 3 Ps. Private sector empowerment and strengthening, and that's including SMEs, women and youth. And that is by training, capacity building, raising awareness, sensitization workshops. It is really about empowering our own private sector, whether the rural women or the grassroots who are in agriculture, or the cross-border women traders, or the youth entrepreneur startups, or the big companies on the continent. This is our real private sector. The second pillar is policy advocacy. All of your excellencies have been talking about the enabling environment, the conducive legislation for investment of the private sector. We need affirmative actions. Honorable Rebecca, you are here representing governments. What we need and what we are pushing for is to have at least 40% of all government procurement goes to African private sector. It is not acceptable, like until now, we are only giving incentives for multinational companies and not giving incentives for our own African private sector. Kenya here, and thanks to the people and government of Kenya who are hosting this high-level forum, they have implemented that 30% of government procurement goes to SMEs, women, youth. Personally, when I was chair of COMESA Business Council, I lobbied with this for the heads of state. So we are looking forward to see how we empower this. There is not acceptable that some products on the continent are not traded among us and only getting containers from China and India. Why? Whatever on the African soil cannot be brought from outside the African soil. So in here, if Kenya have coffee and tea, then we need to see how we really import it from Kenya. If Tanzania have macadamia, we need to import it from Kenya. If Egypt has pharmaceutical industries, 165 pharmaceuticals industries, 400 factories for medical consumables and supplies, why are we bringing from India and China?
Okay, now the head of the African Continental Free Trade Area, or AfCFTA Secretariat, Wam Kilimene, provided further insight into the trade deal and the new horizon that it presents to the continent.
It has been a positive journey looking at how we can drive the growth of our industries in Africa, ensuring that we are doing lots of value addition out of the minerals, out of the agricultural outputs, out of many other products that we have as inputs for industries. Ensuring how we can make total value addition on them before we engage in trade across Africa and beyond Africa. And by doing this is so that we can retain the wealth, we can retain the investment, we can retain the jobs, we can retain many other things. Even sustainable development, as is enshrined in the theme that we have for this private sector forum at the African Union. Also looking at how we can have constant sustainable collaboration between the private sector and the public sector, not only in the country, but also across Africa, so that through that, and this is enshrined in the Sustainable Development Goal number 17 on sustainable partnership, we have collaboration that are creating synergies. I'm here to paint the picture of Africa and how we are looking at it today and the days that are coming. Demographically, you look at Africa as one country that has 1.3 billion people, and by 2050, we are looking at how we can have 2.5 billion people. We have, unfortunately, youths, high rate of unemployment for the youths at 40%. It's expected to escalate by that time. And it's us, as when we are making the way forward as private sector today, to see how in the next 27 years, we are going to have a positive effect as far as employment is concerned. And the middle class in African setup, if I today stands at that 4%, the owners of capital, the owners of knowledge, by 2050, it will be at around 40%. And these are comparative advantages that we have as African continent. Working age by 2050 in Africa will be having 1.2 billion people. We have to get jobs for them. We have to ensure that we're optimizing on the knowledge and this human capital that we have. As Africa, we have set the right stage for ourselves in terms of investments in education. Like here in Kenya, we have free primary education and secondary education, so that we have a working capital that is enabled. In good health, we also have women and girl child inclusion in our works. In fact, like now, when we're talking of export processing zone, like in Kenya, the textile and apparel, we have heavy inclusion of women in the manufacture of garments and apparels. And this is a positive thing that we're looking at, how it can be replicated across Africa, because you find that bringing women into the working fold is something that is quite integral even for the family level and the sustainability of our families. Digitization has also been great as far as Africa is concerned. In Kenya, we are a leading country as far as digital transformation and innovation is concerned. And this is something else that's going to be very important at the African level when we're talking about digital economy and ensuring that we are reducing as much as possible on the cost of production because of the digitization. Factors of production in Africa are also quite high. We're talking about land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship. You find that we have a youth, we have a demography that is quite entrepreneurial. And it is just a question of giving them this chance so that they can get working, they can get into the value addition, they can get into the retail of what is made in Africa. But when you look at the intra-African trade, and even we look at it from regional economic communities, it's a bit wanting. And it's our interest to see how we can reach where ASEAN as a bloc is, or where European Union as a bloc is. As Africa, we are oscillating around 14 to 18%. And in case of East African Community as a regional economic bloc, we are at 18%. Intra-COMESA trade at 14%. Intra-Africa trade, for 14.4%. When talking of North America Free Trade Area, NAFTA, it is at 18, same level as what we are doing in Africa. But our aspiration is to get to where Asia is at 59%, or where European Union is at 69%, or even more, because we have the intent to do trade among ourselves, and especially at this time that we have the African continent of free trade. There is a question of seeing how soon as we can finish on the finalization of the protocols that are being negotiated. We're talking about the rules of origin, starting at around 88% finalization. How can we get to 100%? Or the tariff liberalization category A, B, and C, so that these can operationalize the trade, and we get to the 70% mark that where the European Union is. It is a vision that by 2035, as African continent of free trade takes shape, more trade is going to happen at about 450 billion US dollars, from the current 235 billion US dollars to 655 billion US dollars. And what is going to help us do this? What is coming from Africa should be value added in Africa. If we are talking about our coffee and our tea, we're talking about our minerals. For instance, I can give a case of tea in the country. And we are happy that we had the first consignment at the African Continental Free Trade Area going to Ghana. We have, for the longest, traditionally exported as bulk at 95%. With an aspiration of reducing this or increasing what we are value adding against what we are exporting as bulk. Where are we as Africa? Selling 95% of our tea in bulk, raw, not processed. And then we are importing back when it is finished, when it's blended with orange or something else. Where can we do it here in Africa? And that's the reason why we have that high rate of unemployment for the youth. That's the reason why investments flow. If you look at the investment per GDP, they're oscillating per country between 2%, 3%, or even lower. How can we get this better? Why are we blocking each other as far as trade liberalization is concerned? You find that a regional economic bloc has non-tariff barriers against the other. Or within the regional economic bloc, like now the East African community, we're talking about SADC, you find their non-tariff barriers, and we need to eliminate them as much as possible so that we can continue doing trade as much as possible.